HR people, what did your new employee do that made you instantly regret hiring them? I hope my former boss doesn't comment about his employee that made 2 espressos. When someone asks for a double espresso, I regret being myself, guys. I'm sorry. Story 2. Couldn't figure out how to log into email with step-by-step directions on the first day. Needed step-by-step directions every day for everything on the computer. Me. Day 3. Did you double-click Outlook icon? Him. Oh yeah, now what do I do? Me. Type in your password. Him. What's my password? Me. You picked your password the first day. That's why it's called a password. Only you know it. Him. Oh yeah. Proceeds to sit there for 15 minutes doing nothing because he doesn't know his password. I'm usually pretty gentle when I fire someone. He wanted to argue he was computer literate during his termination meeting. You keep using that word. I ran a call center. Incoming and outgoing calls, turn on 3 programs, hit the button, and everything works automatically. Pretty simple. We hire a lot of felons because we think society gives them a raw deal when they get out. Turns out some of these guys are felons for a reason and deserve a raw deal. This guy was early to mid-30s, had been a mortgage broker before getting arrested for murders a neighbor. Turns out he didn't kill his neighbor, at least the state couldn't prove he did, but he still ended up doing 2 years waiting for trial. The other employees refused to help him after the first week because he would ask the same questions every day, the exact same question. He would ask me and I'd look at the rest of the phone room like, are you kidding me? Is this a prank? This has to be a prank, right? Do you have a condition where you forget everything every night? It took me 3 weeks to get through all the performance improvement plan steps to fire him. But basically, I wanted to fire him on day 3. I knew I'd done goofed. Story 3. A friend of mine works at a construction recruitment agency and recently told me a great story. His colleague got a phone call in the office from a client, the foreman of a large construction site, who immediately began to scream at him to come to the site and collect a laborer from the agency who was on his first day working there. It transpired that this young, chavvy temp had left the tracked excavator he was supposed to be operating to find the foreman and demand a socket set to remove the excavator seat, as he'd dropped his phone under it and couldn't reach it. The foreman told him to duck off and get back to work, and that he could try to retrieve his phone at the end of the day once he was off the clock. Phones weren't allowed on site anyway. After a shouting match, the laborer stormed off, climbed into the neighboring excavator, and used its bucket to rip the cab off his machine to get to his phone. Needless to say, the agency took him off its books. Story 4. I feel like right now I'm that new employee. Day 1. Relative died, delayed my start by 2 days. Day 5. Husband of relative died, was offered compassionate leave. Day 13. Girlfriend fell down the stairs and needed to go to hospital. Day 15. I had a pre-booked holiday, another day off. Day 16. Girlfriend's passport stolen in another country, missed our train home, weather prevented us traveling that entire day. Day 17. Arrived 2 hours late after having to travel across Europe before work. Day 36. Boiler explodes during the night and need to sit around for an emergency plumber who then takes all day to fix it. I really swear it's all the bad luck at once, but even I know it sounds so unrealistically far-fetched at this point. Story 5. They were loudly taking a phone call while waiting to be interviewed. Taking a call is not a total deal breaker by itself, but the call was her coaching the friend into getting fired so she could get unemployment. I didn't hire her, but after I left, I think someone else did. Story 6. I give out a daily summary of unresolved cases and new cases yet to be answered. I handwrite some notes on it as well. On her second day, she asked why her score went down. Confused, I asked her what she meant. Yesterday I got a 10-12, but today only 10-13 the date. Story 7. I once worked with someone who was an absolute waste of space. My boss said he was going to promote him. I told him, "Man, it's a bad idea." After 3 months of training, the guy became a manager. Then, on his first shift alone, stole all the cash from the day's sales. I wasn't even mad. I smiled when my boss told me. Story 8. Not a boss, but guy got hired as my swamped. I used to deliver cabinets in a 1-ton truck throughout the area. Boss says, "Got a good for you. He's big and strong, seems nice." What a great change from the scrawny 18-year-olds he was usually hiring to help me. That would work for 3 days and quit because it was too physically demanding. He starts, first hour, we are driving to the site. He's bragging about the Met he did last night. The girls that he got to kiss him at the club. He's married with a toddler. Second hour, at site, he's asking if I can pick him up for work every day. If he gives me $20 a week, was fair, he didn't live far from the shop. Third hour, he's asking to borrow $100 until payday. I decline and say I never lend money to coworkers. By the end of our 8-hour day, he had gotten lunch, a pack of cigarettes, and promises to be picked up, dropped off every day. I get it when you start a new job, sometimes you're short on money. It happens. I've mooched cigarettes off people in my first weeks too. 2 weeks go by. Hasn't paid me a cent for gas. Kept promising once he gets paid, he'll pay me everything at once. Third week goes by. Gets first paycheck, but only for 1 week, week hold back rules. He gives me 10 bucks and 2 cigarettes from his pack that he just bought himself. 4th week, tell him if he doesn't pay me the gas money today, he's finding his own rides. He responds by saying, fine, I'll just walk anyways. Next day, 30-minute late day because wasn't there to pick me up, so I had to walk. I tell boss to fire this duckhead. He does. I've been here for a while at this point. He needs me to be happy. Guy comes to me saying, I hope you know you're taking food off of my toddler's plate. Just some food for thought. I tell him to go duck himself. Run into him and his wife a couple months later, comes to me, hands me 100 bucks cash, says, sorry for how I acted. I was high on coke for most of that. You think you can get me a job again? I laugh and say, no, I wasn't going to put my ass on the line for him after how he treated our company. Asks for the 100 bucks back. Tell him sure. Hand it back. Ask him if he has food for his baby. Wife looks confused. They didn't have a baby, just a way to get money out of concerned people. Duck you, Tyler. Story 9. I didn't directly hire him, but we once had a new employee shadow me since I was the stock manager. And on day 1, he bragged to me about how much coke he had done the night before. The store manager was about 5 feet away, and I simply looked over the new guy's shoulder and shook my head. He was gone soon after. Didn't expect this to get any attention, so I'll throw in some more context. He wasn't immediately let go because at the time, we really needed the seasonal help, but even so, it only took a couple shifts of being late and smelling like pot for him to be dealt with. I used to work in retail relatively close to a college town, so it's not unusual to have employees hungover, etc. I had just assumed that was the case. Mentioned in small talk that I myself was a little hungover, and he just stops and goes, dude, let me tell you about this party, and continued on into his substances extravaganza of a night. Throughout the day, he had been making frequent trips to the bathroom and told me it was because his nose kept bleeding. I now knew why. Several months later, he came back to reapply for his old job because the store was under new management. I don't think he realized that I was part of that new management, or he had assumed I was just cool with it. I wasn't dude half-assed his job, regardless of the substances. I also have reason to believe he snuck off on his lunch break to smoke pot. I don't have a problem with it. I'm a bit of a stoner myself, but I just don't bring it to work. Story 10. He antagonized every single female coworker. It was like his only way of communicating with anybody of the opposite sex was to be demeaning and constantly using facetious tones to undermine them. Luckily, these weren't the reserved gals he was used to at his private college. He learned this the hard way after making a joke about one of the senior members' lunches being too small and to eat a sandwich. She barked back and he did not return the next day. Story 11. I had a new guy to train in my job where we installed TVs and various other electronics in expensive houses. I had a small part in hiring him, and even though he wasn't from our industry, he seemed to have good skills in related fields and seemed to be willing to learn what he needed to. Our first 2 weeks were spent finishing up a really nice theater. House was completely finished, and it was pleasant, easy indoor clean work. Then we moved on to the next job and had to wire the house, which involved crawling through the attic and underneath the floors, pulling new wires. I turned to this guy and told him to take these 5 wires down underneath the house and crawl them to the other side. He looked at me like I had 3 heads and said, "What? No way, I am not going under there." I was taken aback. This is a huge part of the job, and he had to have known that when he was hired. After a couple minutes of talking to him, it was clear he had no intention of doing any dirty work. He ended up going out and sitting in the work van pouting. I called our manager, and when we drove back to the office at the end of the day, his final check was waiting for him. He was completely stunned and got really upset, trying to blame me as his trainer for setting him up and making him do stuff that no one would ever want to do. I didn't get to see the final encounter myself, but it became the talk of the company for a while. Apparently, he never managed to get it through his head that we all had to do that type of work, and I wasn't singling him out. He blamed me and the company for him losing his job all the way out the door. Apparently, he also tried lying to the unemployment office and got shut down hard when my manager explained why he was let go, and he corroborated it, still assuming that we were in the wrong for asking him to do that type of work. Story 12. Ran an in-home senior care business. Hired a chick and she got a sweet-ass gig. 9 to 5, steady work, great easygoing family, an easily cared for elderly lady. All she had to do was wear scrubs, not tank tops and shorty shorts. That's it. 1 weekend was when that changed. We also found out that she brought a catalog of stuff to sell to the person she was caring for. Ended up selling her like $500 worth of crap. Luckily, we were able to stop it in time. Only person we ever had to actually fire. Everyone else lost their client or just quit. Story 13. My mom hired her, but I fired her. Mom needed a website and didn't want to wait for me to set it up. I already had a domain, hosting, graphics, and so it needed maybe 4 hours of work, but I was busy. She decided to hire to some lady to do it. Kay, whatever. I email the lady and give her the login info and FTP access of the stuff. She emails my mom a week later saying I got a broken theme and she'll need to build a new one from scratch. She'll charge hourly, but my mom will get a discount because she understands kids messing up, meaning me. I immediately go in, kill all of her access, and change passwords. I have the next day off and plan on doing it then. Lady emails me a few hours later saying she can't log in or access the materials. Did something happen? I tell her off, let her know I've looked at her resume and she just stole crap from other people and put her name on it. Seriously, the code comments still showed credit to the actual creators, that I've blocked her completely, and that her help is no longer needed. I CC my mom, then call her to explain in more detail. Mom proceeds to be furious with me for being rude to this scam Karen, until I get her site up and running the next day. Oh, look, no broken theme. Mom never apologized, but she also stopped calling out my rude behavior, and even seems oddly proud of my assertiveness now. Story 14. Entered the clean room without the proper attire, so we had to stop production and bleach about 6 rooms. He was union, so I didn't really have a choice in hiring him, but luckily was able to make sure he was not retained in our department. Story 15. I hired someone for a moving company I was with 7 years ago, based near Milwaukee. On his first day, he was supposed to take the company car and drive to Madison. He didn't show up, fired him on the way to his job. Story 16. Asked me permission to use the bathroom, every time. In spite of my protestations that he was an adult who I trusted to make his own decisions about going to the lav. He also sent me a weekly spreadsheet of all his breaks, potty and otherwise, lunches and arrival and departure times. This is in no way required or the norm in our workplace. Finally, after multiple pleas from me, he stopped doing that. He was very smart and very skilled, but this was the first indication that he would otherwise be a lot of work. Story 17. I didn't hire them, thankfully, but I did work at a call center with a couple that got hired into different divisions. He went to work in sales, and she went into customer service. This isn't all that unusual by itself. What happened next, though? Wow. Their plan from the start was to see how quickly each of them could get let go after they'd started their medical benefits, which kicked in around the 90-day mark. So they were both fairly exemplary. During that time, they both began talking to coworkers in their divisions about their off-work time, internet habits, etc. Eventually, they started canvassing their respective divisions with business cards advertising their adult site and inviting people to join. Apparently, they did this pretty frequently. Get a job to get medical insurance, then plot to get let go so they could draw unemployment and continue to keep medical insurance going via Cobra. In the meantime, they'd get as many of their doctor and dental visits as they could schedule. Then, they'd drum up interest in their adult cam site, because by then, they'd have gotten to know a ton of people. And who doesn't want to see the hot girl? Guy at the office having sex? They were both very attractive. Even the managers involved in this clusterduck of a plan had to admit that the angles on all this were exceptionally slick. And because Phoenix is rife with call centers, they were able to work their way up and down a certain area of town without any of the respective businesses becoming the wiser. Story 18. On his second day, responded to an email complaint about our customer service. My boss told him to respond to the email. He responded by pretty much telling the customer off without having anyone read or approve of it first. Idiot didn't last very long. Story 19. Oh, my good buddy Simeon got hired right out of school for a basic sales job. 2 weeks in most of the offices at a convention. I left the office early to finish off the day from home. On me, I am in tech and could work from home no problem. Should not have left him alone. Day finished out and nothing big happens. Following Monday, security stops me as I'm walking in the building to ask about what we did to this kid after he got caught. Caught doing what? Well, it turns out Simeon decided to take a break after I left for the day. He went and bought a 6-pack and broke onto the roof of the building to drink beers and tan. We are in an 11-story building. On either side of us are 15-plus story building. Simeon decided to strip down to his underwear and tan on the roof, drinking beers and smoking. Security catches him. He blows smoke in the guard's face and tells him to duck off. Gets kicked off the property. Remember, none of us in the office heard anything about this. Simeon was sick and had worked from home the rest of that week. Eventually, the building contacts our HR department, and Simeon is given a warning. He is somehow allowed on the property again, and is told he has 2 strikes against him now. He had consistently been showing up over an hour late each day. Next day, Simeon shows up at noon for a 9-to-5 job. He calls in first to see if it is okay to come in. He slept through 6 alarms. Manager says, sure, come on in. Simeon arrives and is finally fired on the spot. Craziest hire fire I have ever seen. Story 20. I didn't hire them, and I couldn't fire them, but I was in charge of making sure they got fired with a quickness. Had an augmenting wage mariner show up to the ship where I was executive officer. I, and the rest of the wardroom, are in uniform. Crew is not. They are civilian and union. Guy is a general vessel assistant for the engineering department, meaning he is the lowest paid, lowest ranked guy on the ship, able to be tasked with working for any department for basic level jobs. Cleaning, chipping, painting, wiping, loading, unloading. All those unlovely tasks that must get done. He was tasked with mopping and cleaning up after work was done on the piping for our marine sanitation device. Crapter was broken. Nasty work. But we can't have sewage effluent on the deck. He had the nerve to come up and Karen to one of my junior officers that he was mopping poo, and the Joe was getting to sit in AC and inventory movie. The Joe is an officer, and doing a job he was tasked with. All new Joes get a stint as movie officer. It sucks because you are in charge of several hundred movies, all tightly controlled because of copyright issues, and doing a good job of it, so I didn't have to worry about it. And this guy, who was prior to the Navy service, had the chutzpah to come up and complain he was making overtime, 18-hour, for cleaning crap. I know people who would line up to get full bennies and make $18 an hour for whatever I told them to mop. The guy was a crap show. He legitimately wondered why we weren't using him as a ship's photographer because apparently that was his naval background. Well, Skippy, that's because the job description is really very plainly laid out. You sail on a ship and maintain the ship. That's specifically what you were hired for. A dirty birdie who'd leave the head, bathroom, a wet, unflushed mess. He drove roommates to distraction. He even refused to use ship's linen, provided, and slept in oily work gear on the bare mattress. Ugh, I went through hell making the purchase order for those new mattresses, and you're going to put your rank-ass engine room-coated self directly on it? Fortunately, he was on a probationary period. I documented everything and let the folks running our augmenting pool know he was a safety disaster waiting to happen. My regret was thankfully never repeated as they took the hint and let him pursue other avenues of employment. Story 21. Didn't hire this kid, but I was his foreman. Day 1. I have him gluing together some PVC pipes using an extremely runny, very toxic purple primer chemical. Safety glasses are mandatory. I look over, he's gluing these pipes directly above his head, glasses off, and the chemical has a very low viscosity, so it's running down the underside of the pipe and about to drop right in his face and eyes. I yell over for him to stop and step away and explain that he could have been permanently blinded. He proceeds to freak the duck out on me and yell about how I'm not speaking to him in a respectful manner. I'm ducking flabbergasted at this point, but I calmly tell him that he was in imminent danger and to get his goddamn glasses on. At this point, he's already used up all his strikes with me, but it's not my call. Okay, like a half hour later, despite me trying to keep an eye on him, he comes up to me with his mouth and lips stained with this primer liquid, and he's laughing about how he accidentally got it in his mouth. I'm totally lost for words. I've already explained to him that this crap for sure can give you cancer, but he thinks it's a huge joke. Anyway, he lasted a couple months, so many more stories. Finally, I just went ballistic on him one day, and that was that. Story 22. We hired a bench technician to do electronics repair. The first job I asked his help with was to extend a comm cable. 3 conductors, easy peasy. Cut the cable, splice in X amount of new wire, done. He comes back to me an hour later with the original cable, cut in 2, then spliced back together, without adding anything to it. Instead of extending it, all he did was cut it and put it back together. And it took him an hour. Story 23. Had to do some mass hiring for seasonal stuff expectantly when the client decided to pull something on us last minute. So we got all sorts. This one particular woman, though, she was helpless. I understood everyone was coming from a hard spot, especially given we condensed what's typically 2 weeks training into 3 days. But first day on the floor, I'm running around, making sure everyone is set up, ready to go, answering questions, helping people out, the whole gambit. Next day, I get asked in the morning on this one particular woman is doing. I say fine, she didn't seem to ask any questions. Then I get asked why she didn't take any calls. What? Turns out she had signed into the phone, signed out, and couldn't figure out how to sign back in. So instead of asking for help, she just sat there for like a whole 8 hours doing nothing. She wasn't checking her phone, she wasn't browsing the internet, she just sat there. So I make sure she's signed in, now she's getting calls. Great, except not so much. She was apparently going to school for cybersecurity, but I'd honestly be surprised if she knew how to turn on a computer. Every call, every single call, she would call me over for help. Even basic routine stuff that we had covered adamantly in training, stuff she would get multiple times a day, I'd explain it to her and 5 minutes later she would need help with the same issue. She also didn't know how to write ticket documentation. I told her flat out, just do your best. Write exactly what happened on the call. I showed her how to write the bare minimum. Remoted into the user's computer, launched Task Manager, ended XYZ application, relaunched application, user confirmed issue was resolved. Nope, couldn't do it. Literally. I'd have to stand over her shoulder and tell her verbatim on what to do. Now, I'm a helpful guy and patient person, to a point. I'll tell you how to do something repeatedly, but after a week, I'm deeming you either lazy or hopeless because you really aren't making an effort on your own. There were other people around that needed help who were actually making an effort, so I'd take my time to get to her. She immediately became all pissy and sour about it, complaining to management that I was useless, that I wasn't helping her at all, and probably a host of other false accusations. The day she left was one of the best days of my life. Story 24. My dad works for a small heating aid company and is the supervisor for all the servicemen, meaning he is in charge of hiring and firing new technicians and making sure all the guys keep on top of their paperwork. I remember him talking about a new guy earlier this year who he claimed was just awful. I think his name was Kenny. He said anytime a guy goes out on a call, afterwards they have to fill out paperwork stating what was completed and when. And the paperwork is due to the office within 2 days of when that particular job was completed. Kenny would not do his paperwork for weeks at a time, and not until my dad hounded him about it. I remember my dad saying for one job, a week went by where he had told Kenny every single day to do the paperwork, and he never did it. He wanted to fire Kenny because this had happened multiple times, but he has to run all decisions by the owner before he fires someone, and the owner kept telling him to give Kenny another chance. He eventually did get fired, but it was due to failing a substances test. He failed once, and my dad confronted him about it. Kenny begged to be allowed to retake it, claiming there had to be some mistake, so he was given another chance. Now, when their company does substances tests, they are allowed to go to a clinic of their choice within the allotted time. So, for his second substances test, Kenny allegedly brought in a handwritten note from a doctor that just said Kenny passed his substances test, with the doctor's signature. No paperwork, no test results faxed to the company, just a handwritten note. So, the owner asked Kenny for the contact info for the doctor so they could call and speak with him. When they called, it was a random number, and they had no idea who Kenny was. So, the owner confronted Kenny, and he confessed that he wrote the note himself because he knew he couldn't pass a substances test. So my dad was then allowed to fire him, finally. The whole story was so absurd that it's laughable. Story 25. A company my mom worked in begged for a job, was told job demanded flexibility time-wise from his side. First Friday, he informed his superior that he would now leave after working for an hour because there was a football match that he wanted to see and left. Story 26. I had an employee that slept overnight in the office as he had a fight with his girlfriend, and then he used the fuel card from the company car for going to locations to fix it equipment, to fill petrol can, apparently for personal use. Story 27. I was a lead developer for an organization's HR system using PeopleSoft. I hired a computer science person from Stanford, thinking I had just struck gold. After showing the good doctor our development system, the hire asks, "Why are you working with these toys? They are beneath us." I told that person that this was what we use and got rewarded with a derisive scoff. Fortunately, the person took another job at some think tank shortly after, so I didn't have to deal with that for long. Needless to say, I don't hire purely from educational credentials anymore. Story 28. Well, I didn't hire him, of course, but I witnessed this event. Guy joins the army, and we are at basic training. 2 weeks into it, we already have our M16s and are going to the range to learn marksmanship. Well, apparently some guy was constantly ducking with this dude, calling him names, nuts tapping him in the sorts. So Private Retard sneaks a live round off the range and takes it back to the barracks. Private Bully Sack taps him again, quick slap to the balls, while Private Retard is changing. Retard then chambers live round in his M16, cocks the weapon, removes the safety, and pushes the barrel into the back of the bully's skull when he wasn't paying attention. He then proceeds to make him apologize and beg for his life under the very real threat of executing him on the spot. The bully complies, of course, and Private Retard relents. After he removed the round and put down the rifle, a group of recruits take him down while one guy runs to get the drill. Chaos ensues, the MPs arrive and arrest the guy, and we aren't allowed to sleep all night. The guy's discharge paperwork was filed the next day. The crazy part is that it takes a while to get him out of the army, and instead of holding him in the brig, they bring the guy back to our company where he stays with us, with no rifle, of course. What is nuts is this guy went everywhere we did, so if he wanted to, he could have stolen more ammunition and grabbed another rifle at some point. I know he got booted from the army, but I have no idea as to what sort of punishment he received. I really hope that he saw the inside of a jail for a good amount of time. Story 29. He went through an agency, then through my boss that threw me for an interview. Couldn't tell, very well spoken, but still broken English. Had the perfect answer for our interview questions. First week he works, he asked some question that literally he answered in the interview. I gave him a pass because I thought maybe he forgot something really specific about the software he was questioning. Over the first month, it's disgustingly obvious he lied on his resume and in his interview. We're talking someone who claims to be proficient in Microsoft Office, but doesn't know what Excel is, for an example. Dude got paid a ton for 4 months of crap work. Story 30. I worked on the human resources team at a Target. I was the primary person that handled phone screens to determine who was worthy of calling in for in-person interviews with department heads. But one day in November, I was out sick, so one of my HR teammates schedules this one girl to come in. It was the holiday season, so if they made it past the phone screen, they were most likely hired for seasonal work. This angel somehow slips through the cracks and gets hired to be a seasonal cashier. On a team member's first day, they have to take a few of quizzes and training modules, depending on their department, so they can legally work for the store. Even for the departments with the most in-depth training, it should take 1-2 hours, depending before you go train with your associates. She's a cashier and has maybe 5-10-minute multiple-choice quizzes to take. She doesn't finish the training until 4 hours into her 6-hour shift. When her first official cashier shift is scheduled, she doesn't show up. Instead of calling out ahead of time with an excuse of sickness or emergency, she calls 3 hours after her shift was to start and said her baby daddy didn't want to drive her in the rain. She asked if she could talk to the head of guest services about making up the time later that week. Coincidentally, her department head was in the office when she called and took the call on speaker. The words that came out of this girl's mouth when he swiftly fired her over the phone would make Samuel L. Jackson blush. Story 31. When I was training a new 19-year-old girl, I asked her to tell me a little about herself. Huge mistake. She immediately told me that she lost a baby, that the father was a married 35-year-old and she keyed his car and slashed the tires. And then she told me in detail about her mom catching her sleeping with the guy's brother. I'm so thankful that she recently got fired and I never have to deal with her terrible work ethic or hear about her poor life choices ever again. Story 32. I didn't hire this guy, but I was responsible in part for his training. Worked at a preschool in Japan. After the big earthquake, it was hard to find teachers and I'd already booked tickets to move prior to the disaster. So the school was a bit screwed when looking for someone new since no one wanted to work in Japan at that point. Anyhow, they hire this young guy who is already working at another school in our town. He starts about a week or two before I leave the country. At one point, the Japanese staff come get me while I'm prepping some work for the kids for the next day. Can you ask X what he's doing? So I go out into the garden and ask the guy what he's doing. I'm watching the kids. I stare at him and have to respond with, "You do realize that the kids went inside about 20 minutes ago?" Oh, he goes inside to where the kids are playing while they wait to be picked up. A day or two later, same thing happens. The Japanese staff come and get me and ask me to ask him what he's doing. I walk into the other classroom and see him sitting in a corner building a tower out of blocks on his own. "What are you doing?" "Playing with the kids." "The kids started lunch 10 minutes ago. You're playing by yourself." The school kept him for a couple of weeks after I left, but fired him as soon as they could find someone else. They suspected that he was either on substances or very dumb. Story 33. It's hard to find people to make scale models and displays, which we do, so we've had our share of idiots over the years. One day I'm asked to take the latest one in my car and go fix something a client broke on his 1/100 scale building. Now Lance is the kind of guy who likes to blurt out comments he feels reflect positively on him when inappropriate. "You know what I hate the taste of? Feminine deodorant spray." "Lance, how would you know what that tastes like?" Said absolutely no one. Anyway, we get in my car and he immediately gets out a cigarette and lighter. This is a no-smoking car, Lance," I inform him. He looks at me in complete astonishment. "Well, I won't hold that against you." I refrain from saying, "Oh, I'm so glad, you arrogant duck." We do the quick job, or I do it while he talks, and we head back. I have to go by my place. I forgot my wallet this morning. He's talking about a big detour downtown, and I resist, but he makes out like I'm being totally unreasonable and once again cannot believe my perspective on things. I break down and take him to his apartment. "Come on," he says when he gets out. "Let's have a couple of cold ones and take a break." I explain that we're not going to do that because we are on company time, and for a third time, he cannot believe his ears. We come back and I'm not longer his friend, thank God, but he was gone soon anyway. Story 34. Started asking me for advice about men. Not just a little, I'm talking detailed advice, like, I text him this, and he texts me that. What does he mean by that? Should I text him back? Do you think he's done with me? Sadly, said employee is not nearly as young as you might guess. Story 35. My boss loves to tell me the story of a financial analyst he hired a few years ago that was such a disaster. He became infamous. As my boss tells it, the guy came in on his first day of work and loudly declared he was the best financial modeler in the state. He was not, in fact, the best financial modeler in the state. My boss knew on this guy's first day in the office that he had made a horrible mistake. All of this guy's financial models, forecasts, and spreadsheets were utter crap. When constructive criticism was made, he would argue back that the rest of the corporate finance team didn't know anything about finance, and that they clearly didn't see the genius behind his work. It also didn't help that he had zero social skills and made self-aggrandizing statements that put off all his coworkers. The guy made it only a few months before being summarily fired for poor performance and poor culture fit. Story 36. Not a boss, but an NCO so close enough. We had this kid who married his high school sweetheart, then joined the Air Force. In tech school, he decides he likes this chick he met online better and proposes to her. When he gets to our base, we start helping him set up his house for his wife to get there. During lunch one day, he casually tells us that he no longer likes his first wife, so he is actually waiting on his new wife and her 2 kids. In case you didn't know, adultery is a crime under the UCMJ. In the 6 months I knew him, he proposed to no less than 3 more girls. Story 37. Not a boss, but I was working at a grocery store in New Zealand, 4 Square, in a small surf town, Raglan. They hired a new kid. He was the son of the chief of police of the town, so he kind of thought he was untouchable, given how small a town it was. He called out sick on his literal first shift ever. Then came in that afternoon with all his mates, eyes super red, and all they bought was booze, drinking age 18 in NZ. I worked produce there, and I saw him getting checked out with his mates. I turned to the manager and asked, "Hey, didn't Sam call out sick this morning?" "Yep. And he just came in to buy booze? What a get, you gonna talk to him about it his next shift?" "Nope, because he isn't getting another shift." Fastest I've ever seen a new employee get fired at any job. Story 38. This is actually my former boss. Up until recently, I worked at Restaurant Bar, owned by a large winery. My manager, I'll call him Bob, was a recent transfer from another smaller venue within the company. He's 25, and I'm not sure how he got a management job in a medium-sized venue without qualifications or experience. He basically only wants to work 9 to 5 and have weekends off. Anyone in hospitality knows how retarded this is. Quite a few times, he never showed up because he was drinking and wanted to watch the big boxing match. One time, Bob was 2 hours late, so I called him. He said, "Oh yeah, I'm sick, I'm not coming in today." So I had to tend bar alone with a party of 40. I knew he was drinking the night before. I ended up basically running the place for him, which I definitely didn't get paid enough to do, so I quit. Also, money mysteriously went missing around him. He transferred to another venue in town, and money went missing there too. Bob thinks he's getting transferred to another large venue, but he's actually about to get fired. The area manager is sick of his crap and never wanted to hire him in the first place. He keeps saying that he wants to manage a major city venue, but he can't even run a crafty dive bar. Story 39. I hired a guy to update a few of our websites, sat him down, logged him into the system, showed him how to access the various sites and gave him some edits. Checked in after an hour, found him with an open tab on HTML tutorial. He hasn't updated anything yet, literally nothing. He said he had a few people stop by to welcome him aboard, so he didn't get a chance to do anything yet. I said we need to have this done, and that I'd check back soon. I waited another hour, checked back, watched him peck on the keyboard, and he managed to type out a whole line of HTML. I told him we're all set, and we went to HR. Story 40. One of the guys I first hired was a total special case. 18 interviewed well, seems to know the products, etc. Day before our opening, got him to clean the cabinets. Took him about 2 hours. They were as dirty as at the start. Asked him to mop the toilets he used under the broom. At this point, I just laughed in his face and put it down to nerves and thought maybe he was too scared to ask. 1 week later, on his second shift, I asked him to broom and gave him a broom to do it with. I come back 10 minutes later to see his done 1 meter and is poking the floor. At this point, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He told me that's how his old boss taught him to broom. At this point, I realized he was taking the piss and said, "If you don't want to work, go home." An hour later, his mom comes in yelling and ended up giving some abuse. I couldn't help but laugh. Unfortunately, my sister was quite upset. But the fact that an 18-year-old with a child had to get his mom to come in still makes me laugh to this day. Story 41. New salesperson literally looked out the window and stomped her feet because she was mad. Her out-of-state boss and the in-state owners were going to a lunch meeting without her. It was her second day. She lasted less than a month. Story 42. More like, what didn't he do? Which, in his case, was anything he was hired to do. Dude was coasting from day one. When I confronted him about it, he tried all kinds of bull-crap deflection tactics. He tried turning it around on me and my poor leadership and saying he felt he was being given conflicting directions between me and other senior members on my team. When things really got bad, he even tried crying in my office about his recently dead father and how he was depressed. Firing that useless tub of crap was one of the most satisfying things I ever did. Story 43. Supervisor at a hotel in Banff, not hiring boss. But new guy, obviously dumb as rocks, suggested someone walk up mountain in the middle of winter when they asked him what they could do. The mountain was fine to hike, if a bit sketchy in parts, in the summer, but would require a lot of skill to summit in the winter. Story 44. Not the boss, but this guy who worked with me at the car wash ended up stealing a wallet out of the car he was cleaning. He ended up getting caught because he got a pizza delivered to his address that he paid for with the stolen credit card. I have not seen him since. Story 45. I had a temp worker that threatened to go to the A Dutch Union if I didn't stop vaping in my own company. Some of my employees also vape, and he demanded they stop as well. There were 3 things this ducktard obviously didn't know. 1. There's no law against vaping at work. 2. The union doesn't have any power in this matter. 3. He was a temp worker, so I didn't even need to make up an excuse to get rid of him. I told him to get his stuff and get the duck out of my company. Story 46. Hired a secretary to help out at the body shop I was running at the time. The next week, she tells me on Monday all about her and her husband getting crap-faced over the weekend. The very next breath, she asks for an advance on her paycheck because she had her power shut off that morning for non-payment. I don't drink, but I know you spent some money to get you and your husband drunk last weekend. Story 47. Buddy just told me this story. He hired a guy to help him take apart a 100-foot-long greenhouse. There were 2 different size bolt-nut combinations that they had to deal with. Noticed the dude ducking around forever on a ladder, asked what was up, was told that the nut wouldn't come off. My buddy asked if he had the right but on the drill, was assured that it was correct. He took a look. Not only the wrong bit, but the dude had the drill on forward instead of reverse. So even with the right bit, he would have been doing it wrong. Story 48. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend. My friend's boss has just hired 2 new people that work the same shift as my friend. Nothing about them seemed off other than one of them was fired from his last job. Not even 2 weeks into the job, these 2, one guy and one girl, plus another employee, show up to work on substances. I'm talking like full-blown substances. One of the guys spends half his shift staring at the freezer door. The girl is saying the strangest thing, and the other guy is swearing on his life that the produce is talking to him. My friend is amused by this whole thing, and everyone there knows these 3 are going to get fired. Goes into work 2 days later, and freezer guy got a raise, and talking fruit man is being considered for shift lead. Story 49. I didn't hire them, but it was my recommendation, so my boss hired them on the spot. Day 1, 12 p, start time for training. Calls in sick at 11:30 a. I hear from a mutual friend of ours that they'd been playing COD all night, and when I get off work, I should join them when they play again. It set the tone for their employment. Story 50. An old boss of mine once told me about the best interviewee he ever had. He talked about her like he was blown away, and she was presenting herself as potentially the best hire he'd ever have. The job was a cashier position. She came in on her first day and got fired because she did not know how to count change, at least in American currency. He felt pretty bad about it, but couldn't afford to spend time training her and making sure she wasn't screwing up. It was a small store with lots of customers, many of which had short fuses. Story 51. On his first week, he won a prepaid credit card for performance. Sales job. Hours after I personally had given him the gift card, one of my managers advises me that he's been smearing his feces and drawing swastikas with them in the men's washroom. I terminated him, awkward to say the least. Before it's asked, we had cameras outside the public washrooms that allowed us to identify the person doing it. Story 52. There was a guy in our group who was fired after about 10 months because he just did not develop any technical skills and didn't show the drive or motivation to learn. This was a lab technician type job, and after 6 months, he was sweeping the floors and stuff instead of doing the actual lab functions. If you asked him to do something, it would take him 3x as long as you thought it would, and he would usually still do it wrong. Super nice guy. I believe he was officially fired because of budget reasons, but we were told afterwards that it was because of performance. Story 53. Once a month on a Friday, we finish early and have drinks as a small team. Boss hired new person, Friday of their first week. We had drinks and they ended up absolutely wasted. Could have been embarrassing for them, but laughed off until we tried getting them a cab home, which they refused, loudly stating they will be driving home. Eventually, they submitted and got in the cab, only to take it 1 block away and cause a massive scene at the office building parking lot when they wouldn't let them take their car. Was a nice person, and I can't help but feel they had a problem with alcohol. Still, first week is first week, and probation periods are there for a reason. Story 54. Not an employer. I worked at a dealership for a long time, and for years we had the same delivery driver for our big parts. One random day, a new guy shows up to deliver us a new Dodge Cummins long block, retailed for over 10 grand with turbo. Ask where the old guy was, new guy said, "He retired, today is my first day." Cool, whatever. New guy backs into our shop and goes to offload this very expensive engine and proceeds to just walk it off the edge of his lift gate, probably a 5-foot drop, right on its top. He tried making me sign for it, and I firmly declined that offer and called his office to decline the shipment. He didn't show up for our delivery the next day. Kind of felt bad for the guy. Story 55. Wasn't my decision to hire this kid. As a matter of fact, I was against it from the beginning. On his first day, he crashed a brand new BMW M4 into a customer's i3 and didn't tell anyone about it. They gave him a warning. The next week, he crashed a Mustang into the side of the building, again didn't tell anyone, and was given a warning. Somehow, the kid still has a job here, but only works 2 days a week if he is lucky. Story 56. He started showing coworkers pictures of his junk that he took with his cell phone. I had to let him go immediately. He then started bad-mouthing the company on Facebook. He kept claiming we fired him because he is gay. For the record, I don't care if you are gay, but I do care about you harassing your coworkers. Story 57. Dumb know-it-all constantly telling upper management that if he were in their position, there wouldn't be any angry customers, once said to me, "Do you mind if I give you a little constructive criticism?" I said, "Yes, I actually do mind. That's not your place." He proceeded to tell me his opinion. That conversation didn't end in his favor. The next day, the owner had an interview with someone and was about 5 minutes late. Owner came in and said, "Sorry to keep you waiting." Idiot employee says, "Yeah, owner, why you gotta make him wait, man?" Thinking he was being funny. That was the end of him. Story 58. Told one of my other team members that she had great tits and couldn't stop imagining her lips wrapped around his junk. He got slapped 3 times that day. Twice by her, once with a pink slip. Story 59. So a few years back, I ran a weapons-related company, self-defense stuff, knives, AR-15 stuff, etc. Hired a buddy of mine to work a gun show with me as I had to handle stuff for my upcoming wedding. Found out he spent the majority of his time outside smoking and away from my booth. No telling how much lost revenue. Luckily, nothing expensive or big stolen. Guess who didn't work the next day of the show? Story 60. I'm not a manager, but I'm very close with 2 of the hiring managers at my store, and they told me that they hired New Girl and instantly regretted it when she couldn't tell her lefts from her right and B. Story 61. Not really a boss, but by the looks of my boss's face, I think he had the instant regret face. So story goes like this. A few years ago, it was around the end of the year, boss asked this colleague to distribute our newest products info, brochures to our regular partners' customers with USB sticks, about 50 of them. Boss specifically said, remember to put them in files, as in create folders and separate the products and other in the USB. But colleague misinterpret that as physically put the USB sticks in files, you know, those transparent A4 size office file envelope. So next day, he show up with 50 of those, each with a USB drive within. Story 62. Relative works as a manager for his department in accounts and sales. He hired a guy that had really great credentials and references. 1 month into his job, and this was mid-summer, he was notified by his boss that the employee he hired was roaming around the office after hours in his boxers. His excuse, he had no AC at his place and didn't think there were security cameras everywhere. Story 63. Gave me a list of 8 days off he needed for vacation, then asked for a company credit card. And because he was relatively short, 5'5" maybe, he said he needed a new desk because it was too high, the chair adjusts tool. Oh, he needed the fridge stocked with Diet Coke, Red Bull, and V8. Story 64. Had a web designer working under me who was habitually like an hour late. I thought I was a genius. Web guy, we've noticed you're habitually late, and we've talked with you about it, so rather than try to change you, we're going to adapt and change your hours to start an hour later. Dude started coming in an hour late from that time. Sorry, dude, I tried. Maybe next job, don't stay up all night smoking and playing video games. Story 65. We had a receptionist, an older guy my boss really liked. He was nice, but kind of bizarre. Boss tells him one day, screen all of my calls, please. Receptionist. Okay, I will. A little while later, I'm in with my boss, and the guy comes to the door of the conference room and yells at the top of his lungs, "There's a phone call for you on line 3. When our ears stopped ringing, we asked WTF, and receptionist guy said, I thought you wanted all your calls screamed. We didn't fire him, though. He was too funny to let go. Story 66. Not a boss, but a coworker called into work. He was dating another coworker, so a while after shift change, he came to work and hung out at her workstation throughout most of the night. His line stayed down the whole shift for lack of an operator. I don't know why he was surprised when they fired him. He did call in and let them know he wouldn't be in to work that night. Story 67. I got to fire a classmate once. I worked at an arcade in HS for summers. Second summer there, I was closing and the floor supervisor. This guy would do all sorts of weird stuff. I knew him to be off a little. We had one class together. Anyways, he only wanted to run people through laser tag and bumper cars. Not help in kitchen prize, counter, or clean anything. He also seems like it was a cool idea to walk around the tiny-ass bumper car area while it was running. Story 68. New hire auto mechanic was a total pothead, but figured as long as he could change oil, he would be fine. 2 days in and he went on lunch and didn't come back. So after about an hour and a half, we realized his truck was in the parking lot and decided to go check it out. Yep, he was passed out in the front seat with a quart-sized bag of weed on his lap. Told him to grab his toolbox and go home. Story 69. I didn't end up hiring her, for obvious reasons, but during a trial for a job, I work in retail, she started bragging about how she stole so much stuff from her previous job, how easy it was as they didn't have cameras in their stock rooms, and how she didn't get caught. She wasn't the smartest, Bosses of Reddit, what is the most ridiculous thing you've ever had to fire someone over? Story 1. Managed a deli. One of my workers ran out with a chicken on each hand laughing manically. No gloves. Idiot thought I'd gone to lunch. Was in front of customers. Story 2. My boss told us stories of how he had to fire a coworker for constantly farting around others and the higher bosses. Like literally hiking a leg and letting it go. Story 3. Okay, so I used to be a manager at a security company. The client site I was working at was a manufacturing plant. They ran the plant during the 4th of July, so in return they had free food in the break room and made the soda machines free for a day. So if you pressed a button, you get a soda. They said that my security guys could have soda too, even though we weren't technically employees of the company. My shift went by, and I ended up having some free snacks and 1 free soda. I was relieved by 2 security officers to work the second shift. I gave them a heads up that there was free soda, and they were welcome to grab 1 or 2. Well, fast forward a few hours, and I'm getting called by my district manager asking why one of my employees is stealing sodas. I had no idea what was going on. I made some phone guys, and the guy ended up being let go before he even finished his shift. The next day, I talked to the guy's shift partner, and this is roughly what he told me. I was doing my rounds, and I came back, and he had 2 sodas on the desk. He said, "Hey man, did you know there's free soda?" I said, "Yeah," and didn't think anything of it. It was his turn to do rounds, and when he came back a little later, he had 4 or 5 soda cans in his arms, and his pockets were stuffed with cans. I said, "Hey man, you shouldn't be taking that much. Those are for the employees, not for us." All he said was, "Nah, it's not for me. It's for my family. They're gonna love it." I dropped it at that and decided I would report it later. The shift continues then. Next thing you know, he's coming out of the break room with a shopping bag full of sodas. Again, I told him it was wrong, and he gave me some spiel about his family needed all this soda. He just couldn't believe it was free. I kept bugging him about it, but he was convinced that it was okay. I went on my rounds, and he was nowhere to be found when I came back. 2 employees came up to me and told me that he took 2 garbage bags full of soda out to his car. The employee said he just had this look in his eye, and he was all smiles. He just sat there, pressing every button on the machine and loading his bag with sodas. I asked him what he was doing, and he said it was for his family. I looked outside, and sure enough, I saw him loading his car with 2 garbage bags. So that was my employee's account of what happened. After that point, apparently the factory employees told their boss what was going on, who in turn called my security company's office. Like I said, we had the guy out of there before he even finished his shift. He was a piece of crap employee anyway. And to be honest, we were already looking for a reason to fire him. The bad part is that he made our security company look like crap to the client. Story 4. I was not this particular employee's boss because he worked in a different department. He asked me if I could change his email password for him. I was the only person with access to this feature. The default password for everyone was their last name. So many employees made this same request. After I changed the password to what was desired, he emailed me back from the email account to confirm that the change had worked. The next day, he did not show up for his shift. He told his supervisor that he was unaware that he had to work. He had worked the same schedule for 5 months because he could not check his company email, which is how schedule changes are communicated. He said someone mysteriously changed his password on him, and he lost access. I assume he didn't expect our departments to interact and that he could put the blame on me without any follow-up. He was told not to show up for any of his other shifts. Story 5. I had a manager who was fired because he caught a customer stealing and asked him to leave. The guy punched my manager in the face, and when he went to punch him a second time, my manager shoved him away. The manager was fired for assaulting a customer. Story 6. After numerous complaints about his condescending and defensive behavior, we pulled him into the office and told him that his inability to accept criticism / admit fault was an issue that needed to be fixed for him to continue working there. After 30 minutes of arguing with us, he was given an assignment to take a break, get some fresh air, and come back when he understood what we were telling him. 10 more minutes of denial and circular conversations, and finally he left. Came back 10 minutes later and jumped right back into his bullcrap. All we needed him to do was stop proving us right by shutting the duck up. Dude did not have the capacity. Story 7. Worked as a department head for large financial institution. Had this one guy who absolutely refused to adhere to the dress code. And I'm not talking wearing sneakers in the office. This ducker would come in every day with baggy shorts, stained t-shirts, and reef sandals. When I took over the team he was on, I wasn't having any of it. He stuck out like a sore thumb among all the other well-dressed professionals. We have existing and potential clients who would visit our facility, and the last thing I needed to hear from my boss was that they noticed how sloppily dressed Crapbag was on their walkthrough. Hell no. I gave him one warning, curt but polite, asking that he come to work dressed in accordance with policy, that he represents the company and must have a professional appearance, the usual spiel. Next day, he came in with what I swear was the same shirt-shorts combination. Probably slept in his clothes after a weekday bender and woke up late or some crap. Who knows? The second warning wasn't as nice, and he got defensive with me, saying how this is the first time anyone gave him a hard time over the dress code. His old boss was a huge pushover, and everyone got away with crap, but everyone knew the ducking policy. I explained that I don't do things the same way as manager before me, and to do his part in what was a very simple request. Come to work dressed for the job. There is an image to maintain, trivial as it may be. The following Monday, he shows up, again, with shorts and a baseball jersey. I gave myself a minute to facepalm in my office and work myself up to an uncomfortable confrontation. At this point, it was blatant disrespect, and he was going to push to see how far he could get away with the new boss. The conversation was brief. Basically said, "Go home and change. We can't have you here looking like that." I looked him up and down as I enunciated that to convey my disgust. He got up, mumbled some crap under his breath, ignored my "excuse me," and walked out of the office. An hour later, and Crapbag comes back in wearing an entire tuxedo. Guess he thought being a smartass and going overboard would get me to stop haggling him about it. Turns out he was right. I fired him on the spot for insubordination and never bothered him about the dress code again. Story 8. I was a supervisor at a call center and worked the overnight shift, so I have many. Here are my top 2. 1. When I came into work, the daytime supervisor told me that one of his workers reported that they found stems and seeds from what could have been substances at one of the far corner desks, and to keep my eyes open. About halfway through the shift, I noticed the person sitting at that desk was sitting hunched over and looking around nervously. As I walked over toward them, they tried to hurriedly cover things up and act like they were on a call. I told them to stand up and move away from the desk. As they did, a bag of substances and papers fell from their lap. When I picked up the keyboard, they had a substances sitting on the desk. I told him to pack up and leave. He showed up the next night like nothing happened and wanted to know why his access badge wasn't working. I told him he was lucky it was me and he wasn't in jail. 2. I had an employee who kept getting viruses and spyware on his computer. I'd have to have the tech guys come down a few times a week to clean it off. I warned him a few times that if it continues to happen, they'll start monitoring what he does to find out the cause. He assured me he wasn't doing anything, and it must have been the daytime person he shared a desk with. Well, one night I noticed he had been on a call for well over 45 minutes, and we had a rule. If your call goes over 15 minutes, it needs to be escalated to a CR tech. I sent him a message, asked if everything was okay. He said yes and was finishing up. About 20 minutes later, I noticed he was on the same call, so I decided to tap into the call. When I got on the call, it was dead silence. Like the person hung up, but the call didn't drop. I could see he was clicking around, so I pulled up our monitoring software and began viewing his screen. On the screen was adult film. As I stood up and started walking towards his desk, he started frantically closing windows. I told him that his services were no longer needed and that we'd mail him his last paycheck. Then he has the audacity to try and argue with me that he wasn't doing anything wrong. I told him what I'd seen and that I could start pulling log files if he'd like. He packed up and left without another word. Story 9. Not a boss, but something that was a near firing. I did a summer abroad to Hong Kong when I was 21. As a white dude who didn't know a word of Chinese prior, it was amazing. I worked for an internship at Wells Fargo there. I was the one white guy in the office. Though my Chinese friend in the program was American too, the employees only really thought of me as the lone American since I was the exotic one. Whatever, anyway, my boss's director came to visit the Hong Kong office from America for 2 weeks. For the sake of this story, I'm going to call her Emily. Emily was a big black woman from the Bronx and was quite honestly one of the nicest employees I met when I was there. Emily always checked in with me and the other interns to see how we were doing and being treated well, as my piggly-shaped and nosed boss was a nightmare to work for. But that's another story. Honestly, my most peaceful times were when Emily was in the office. So I was mortified when Emily was spoken to by another employee in the office in such an obliviously disrespectful way. This Chinese employee, I'll call Lisa, had just come back from a world tour with her family. Emily came to say hello to her. Emily: "Hi Lisa, how was your trip?" Lisa: "Oh, Emily, it was so nice. I went to Australia and it was hot. And I went to Greece and it was lovely. And, oh, Emily, I visited your home country." Emily: "Oh, how did you like the United States? Where did you go?" Lisa: "No, Lisa, I went to Africa." Emily: "What?" Lisa: "Yeah, I went to Africa and I saw the tigers and the giraffes and your home is so beautiful." I'm sitting at my desk with my jaw on the floor and my eyes glued. I don't think I blinked for 5 minutes watching this whole conversation. Emily: No, Lisa. I'm not from Africa. I'm from the United States." Lisa: "Oh, come on." Emily: "I know that's where you're originally from." Emily: "No, Lisa, my roots aren't even African. My family is from Barbados." Lisa: "Oh, it's okay. I love the country, Emily. Lisa walked away and Emily stood there stunned. She gradually must have realized she was in the middle of an office as she slowly turned and saw my pale face staring right at her. We locked eyes for what felt like forever, and I finally broke me. Did that just happen, Emily? Yes, this actually isn't that uncommon. Emily walked away into an office, probably to cry. I overheard from my boss that Lisa was spoken to about the event, but Lisa was never fired, just told to watch her damn mouth. Emily and I probably spent the most time together outside of my boss for the rest of her trip. I was just happy she had someone she felt comfortable with. But holy crap. Stay fu Lisa, story 10. I was a manager in a university IT department. We started noticing a huge amount of Direct Connect, old P2P file sharing program, network traffic coming from the public student computer labs during the same hours every night. I asked Fred, the employee who supervised the labs during the night shift, about it and asked him to keep an eye out for who or what was pulling down all of that data every night. After a few nights of Fred not being able to find the cause, I went by the lab one night to investigate. As I was walking around the lab, I saw an obviously non-university-owned desktop set up on the floor in the corner of the lab. I asked Fred who it belonged to, and he said he didn't know. I went over and turned on the monitor, and there was a list of 100s of active downloads of adult film. I asked Fred if he had seen anyone bring the computer in. He said no. I clicked on the start button and was greeted with Fred Smith in large letters at the top of the start menu. This guy who was supposed to be supervising the lab had been bringing in his personal desktop, plugging it into the university network in a corner of the lab, and downloading gigs and gigs and gigs of adult film all night, every night. To make it worse, he knew that we were aware of the data usage and looking into it, but he just kept on going. To make it even worse, I reprimanded him for it and allowed him to keep his job, and then he was caught doing the same thing less than a week later. Story 11. We had a dishwasher who was a little on the slow in the head side. He'd always get super angry when a bunch of dishes would come in, which was pretty much all the time. One day, tons of dishes poured in for a really long time, and he was losing it, throwing stuff around. The whole area was a big, huge, wet mess. He grabbed a reasonably heavy rack of dirty glasses and tried to move it quickly from one place to another and slipped and landed in the wet mess he had created over the last few hours with the glasses on top of him. He got up and was shaking with rage, starting making a high-pitched free sound, stuck his own arm in his mouth and bit down until he bled. Story 12. Aside from very poor performance, I had to give many written warnings to an employee who couldn't stop smearing his boogers on official corporate documents as well as documents shared with coworkers. Story 13. Fired a guy for being overly arrogant, talking like he was hot crap, that the job any idiot could do, pretty much mouthing off in his first week. Tried to overlook it all, until multiple departments started to complain about his attitude. Ironically, he cried when I fired him. That was a first and last. Story 14. Once upon a time I worked for Circuit City, and our staff was not always the cream of the crop, so to speak. I recall the following firings. 1. A guy took a smoke break, went out to stand beside the car audio installation bays and started smoking a joint. Was shocked that we cared because he was on break. 2. Terminals were pretty locked down for internet surfing, but you could access email. One forward thinker emailed himself adult film ahead of time so he could look at while at work on the sales floor. 3. Sales guy got mad that his lunch got delayed, so he punched a POS terminal and shattered the screen. 4. Seasonal guy always shows up 30-45 minutes late. After the 6th or 7th time we fired him, he tried to sue for racial discrimination. Amazing things people did not get fired for. 1. Manager gets sex with the cleaning lady in the supply closet repeatedly. 2. Different manager played Halo right when it came out for a whole shift. Warehouse guy stole a whole box of Madden 06 when it came out, 50 copies. But since the footage only showed him hiding the box by the exit but not taking it, nothing was done. 4. Guy gets angry, he didn't get a promotion, throws his keys across the store, screams, storms out, comes back 2 hours later and resumes work. No one said anything. And this is just a few of the reasons Circuit City shut down. Story 15. Had an employee whose background check came up clean and worked for us for about 6 weeks. She was fantastic in her interviews. Attractive, well-dressed African-American in her mid-20s who seemed exceptionally charming and outgoing. During the time she was there, the stories she told about her past became increasingly over the top to the point where the sum of the stories made it staggeringly impossible to believe. She claimed to a prominent local politician at an event we were hosting that both of her parents had PhDs from MIT, but that they had abandoned her when she was 16, leaving her to care for her baby brother with no assistance, and that she had gotten a 176 on the last but was going to retake it because she knew she could ace it. We started pooling the stories she had told different people around the office, and if they had all been true, she would, among other things, be fluent in Japanese and Arabic, Been a marathon runner, a triathlete, a world-class computer programmer, a key campaign advisor during both Obama campaigns, and a dermatologist. So I looked into her background myself and found what you would expect. Her background had been clean because she was using a stolen identity. Under her real name, she had been charged with numerous felonies, nearly all of them involving some type of fraud. When confronted with all this crap, she claimed all of the good things were true and that all of the bad things were lies. It took over an hour to fire her, and when I finally got her to leave, she returned an hour later with all this bogus documentation to show that she actually a genius and wasn't a confidence trickster. While we were firing her, our office manager checked her purse. She had bragged about having a license to carry a concealed weapon before and found 2 box cutters. I honestly got the sense that she was mentally ill but very high functioning, and that in her mind, she had convinced herself all this crap was true and genuinely believed it. Story 16. Not sure if question is asking, what's the most ridiculous thing I was required to fire someone for? Or, what's the most ridiculous thing someone has done to get fired? I'm going with the second. I was an assistant manager at a Halloween costume store, and we were short-staffed. An employee was required to open the store, and then I would arrive 2 hours later, they would take their break, and I would count the register. One day I arrived, and the opener had shopping bags from Hot Topic and other stores around the mall, and began showing me all of these cool new things he had purchased. He goes to break, I count the register to be $80 short. Call in the manager, and when the kid got back from lunch, they talked. The kid admitted that he took $80 from the register and left the store unattended to go shopping. That being said, he was fired and informed, to his shock, that the money would be deducted from his last check. Story 17. We had a dress code rule, and after 3 write-ups, you're fired, when he should have had a pair of black slacks and our polo shirt with our logo on it. So the first day I write him up, hand him a new polo, and just deal with the khaki pants. Day 2 rolls around and he is wearing almost the same thing from the day before, except a white pair of jeans. So I ask him what the deal is, since I know he has 2 polo shirts now. He says his girlfriend doesn't like our uniform and gave him these to wear instead. So I tell him to leave the house with his clothes she likes him in and change into the uniform at work. He agrees, and today I send him home with a write-up. Day 3 rolls around and he shows up in nearly the same outfit again. Light pants with a dark dress shirt. This time he is carrying in a bag and he goes and changes into the uniform. Well, 5 hours of work go by and he is a perfect worker. Then I see him walking toward me from across the floor, being towed by some big angry lady. His girlfriend, the big angry lady, is furious that he changed out of his nice clothes and into our horrid uniform. She yelled at me for making him do it and yelled at him to go put on what she put out for him to wear. I told him if he changes now, he may as well leave his work uniform here because he will be fired. Well, she yells at me for a while and eventually gets really pissed and hits some of the machines, so she was escorted out by security and he got fired because he couldn't wear the uniform. Story 18. I had to fire my best friend while working at a university help desk. He came in for the Sunday morning shift and he brought an external hard drive with a bunch of movies. A friend of his came in to work the Sunday evening shift and begged and pleaded for him to leave the hard drive so he could watch movies too, and the guy caved and did so. Unfortunately, the second guy was not smart enough to move the hard drive over to the PC he was stationed at, and instead, he decided to stream the movies over the network, which triggered every alarm imaginable for the network admin to observe the next morning. My manager called me into her office at noon on Monday and told me it was super cut and dry. She can fire them or I can. So I fired them. The first guy, my real good friend, just laughed and went home. Second guy got real belligerent and angry, all because there was too ducking lazy to unplug and move an external hard drive. Story 19. Not a boss here, but I saw a friend get fired for being a stubborn Karen. She refused to let a new employee take the only evening shift she had and for her to work another night instead. The new employee could only work on that particular night. Meanwhile, my friend was perfectly capable to work any night of the week, which her bosses were well aware of. Her reasoning for refusing to switch nights was that she felt entitled to dictate which night she wanted to work. Her bosses kindly asked her to understand the circumstances, but she snapped back saying that they shouldn't have hired this person and it wasn't her fault that the new employee could only work that one night. Yep, she got sacked. Just to clarify, my friend was given more than a 2-week notice of the changes, and her bosses gave her the option to pick any other night of the work week that suited her. My friend had no prior commitments or responsibilities on any other given night of the week and was flexible to work other nights. I'm not trying to defend her bosses because, to a point, I understand that it wasn't her fault, and she had somewhat of a fair reason, but she was ultimately fired for her unprofessional attitude of screaming at her bosses about the situation instead of being an adult about it. If I were in her shoes, yes, I would have been angry, but I would have sucked it up and worked around it. She honestly needed the money more than she needed that particular shift. Sometimes you just gotta work shifts that you don't like, but you gotta get over it. It's not the end of the world. Story 20. Used to work at an ad agency, was team manager. Fired someone for always insisting on putting big-breasted girls on all the ads. He insisted on big-breasted blondes running around on a beach for a life insurance commercial. Had enough of his crap, fired him on the spot. Story 21. I had a coworker who was leaving her job as an EMT to go to med school full-time. Everything was cordial, she gave adequate notice, left on polite terms, and the company wished her the best. 2 months later, they called her and asked her to come in. She sat down with them, and they explained that her status was being changed from departed to terminated. Apparently, they had some security footage from before she left, over 2 months ago at this point, of her tossing her work Toughbook, a laptop used to collect patient data, onto the front seat of the ambulance. They said that because this was done at such and such a distance, it constituted an intent to destroy company property. She was completely dumbfounded. She said she sat there for several minutes and said, "But I already quit." They replied that they were changing her status to having been fired. So she did what any reasonable person would do. She filed a wrongful termination suit with our union, who happily took it up. The union tried to win any victory against corporate possible and returned to her school. Had they not called her in, everyone would have gone on their merry way. Story 22. I had a driver go missing for a few days. When he resurfaced, his truck and thousands of dollars worth of material were missing. He claimed he'd been kidnapped and held at a motel. He courageously escaped when his captors lowered their guard. The truck was later found stripped of everything of any value. He refused to file a police report because the kidnappers were still out there. Later found out the other guys called him the Met Head. Story 23. Not me, but a coworker was fired for refusing to shower. Food service industry. Basically, the guy never should have been hired to begin with, but I believe that his aunt was higher up in the company, so he was an auto hire, family-owned company. I actually saw him drop a burger on the ground right in front of a customer, pick it back up, apologize, and then hand him the burger. That one only merited a verbal warning. He was eventually fired after a litany of complaints that would have gotten anyone else axed, because we had 6 customers complain in a single day that the guy just reeked. He was on cash register. Manager told him to go home and shower or not come back. Guy flipped him the bird and said he was going to sue. Never darkened our doorstep again. Story 24. My dad is a manager over a shop, and here's a short list from over 15 years. 1. An older gentleman went outside and started acting like the trucks were his orchestra. He often has to warn drivers about crapting outside of the toilet. 3. This guy got fired for poor performance, but after he got fired, he started taking his stuff outside, then asked if he could just use the restroom. Well, it was in use, so he used my dad's. He left and my dad went to take a leak. The guy smeared feces all over the walls and threw it onto the ceiling and into the sink. 4. A really fat mechanic is about to get fired for doing everything he needs to, really slowly, then going to the bathroom and re-editing. He also gets paid by the hour, so he is actually making close to what my dad makes. And that is why I will never work as a mechanic or manager. Story 25. I was threatened with a demotion once for refusing to fire an employee. I took the demotion and left the company. They fired her anyway. Here's the story. So I started a small company a few years back and quickly worked my way up. We specialized in insurance overpayment recoveries. Basically, when insurance companies paid more than they were supposed to, we got that money back for them. I was promoted to be in charge of my own team at 21 Lawan, youngest in company history. My team quickly grows to become the largest in our division, and only one of my employees is not meeting her goals. I re-audit all of her work, only to find 0 issues. I mean, she was working more thoroughly than I did, regardless of the fact that I was able to prove to my vice president that she had, quite literally, been perfect as far as quality goes. They wanted me to fire her. I argued with them for a week and eventually refused to do it. I was not about to fire someone for not doing a damn thing wrong. They tell me I'll either fire her or give up my team. Duck it then, demote me. I left the vice president office and had a meeting with my team letting them know what was going on, after meeting with the in danger EE first, and they absolutely rallied behind me. It was extremely touching. I left that company almost 3 years ago now, and I'm still in touch with every member of my team. Story 26. Last year, we knew one person working FOH at my restaurant was going to be let go by the end of the year. So my coworker took it into herself to try to convince my boss that I was the one who should be fired. She also made up a bunch of lies about me, like one day I got very sick during my shift and had to go to the office and puke my guts out for the rest of the night. And she told my boss, no wonder she's sick, she had 8 mugs of coffee tonight. I hadn't. It might have worked except because I'm married to my boss. Of all the people working there, I was the one who had been working hand in hand with him for 4 years, so her 8 months. So he knew my work habits. The only reason I'm not legally co-owner of the restaurant is because I don't want the responsibility. Half the money my husband used to open the restaurant was mine. So, she was fired for creating a hostile work environment. In other words, for being a lying, conniving Karen. Story 27. Not me, but my good friend got hired as a contractor for a big game development project. He was so excited because he's always wanted to work for this company and was trying to impress them so that they would hire him full-time. Anyway, he was doing animations for them, and in order to get on their good side, he would load up his thumb drive with assets and take them home to work in his spare time, for free, mind you, doing it on his own time. Well, the ET or security department or whatever detected copies being made, and his boss called him in to question him about it. He told the truth and was promptly fired for mischarging and removing assets from the building. He had only been working there like 3 days. The boss wasn't a total banana about it, but his hands were tied. He told my friend this was the first time he had to fire someone for working too hard. My buddy was absolutely crushed, of course, but he's recovered since then. He's actually a pretty sought-after freelance animator that has worked on major crap since then. Story 28. Once we had to fire someone for falsifying obituaries, she would find them online and copy them into Word, inserting herself as a family member to get additional time off. Story 29. A few years back, I used to work at the mall unloading delivery trucks. Once a week, the delivery would include a large plastic tub filled with jewelry, easily 10 or 20 grand worth of gold and diamond. For a year, that plastic tub was a huge temptation. For the first 2 hours of the day, I was the only person in the store. Also, while the store was closed, the idiot store manager kept the security cameras off to save electricity. Unfortunately, my parents raised me with morals, so I never stole anything. However, 2 months after I quit, the guy who replaced me got fired for theft. However, his plan was a little different than mine. Instead of stealing the 20K tub of jewelry, he took an $80 set of luggage. Instead of doing it in the morning, before the store was open and cameras were switched on, he waited until noon. And instead of taking it out the back door, he'd rolled the luggage through the store, past dozens of people. To this day, I have no idea how he thought that would work. The only way his plan could have been dumber is if he had asked the security guard to help load the luggage in his car. Story 30. Flaky guy calls in late to his night shift and says he can't make it because he's sick, so I reluctantly cover for him. A friend of mine sees him a bit later at the local college bar, partying up with his bros, and shoots me a picture text of him taking shots. Confronted flaky guy the next day via text. Technically, I didn't have to fire him, but he never came back to work. Story 31. Only had to, got to, fire one person ever. And oh baby, was it magnificent. This clown was the general manager, and I'd temped in a bit as a server. So when I came in, he thought nothing of it. When I came into the kitchen, I literally saw him poking a steak on the grill with his finger, tried to take him upstairs, but he wouldn't have it. We settled by the ice maker, and I told him, dude, you're ducking gone. He asked why. Because you sap $1,000 a week out of this place to be the kitchen manager, but you cook less than 5 hours a week. You do nothing to manage. You know what, just go. Turns out he stole massive amounts of food, plus a bunch of neon beer signs from upstairs. Worthless bucket of banana. On top of that, he tried to add me on Facebook. No, don't think so. Duck off, Corey. Story 32. Had an employee leave the US for India for a personal emergency and didn't bother to let me know until he'd been gone for 3 days and refused to provide a date when he'd return. If he'd been upfront, I'd have been supportive, but tolerating ridiculousness isn't in my job description. Story 33. I was fired from a position with an Australian telecommunications firm by the name of Telstra for preferring one device over another. I was the senior technical consultant for my region, 100-kilometer radius of my home city, and often worked at different stores around the region. When the new iPhone 5 was being hyped for release, I had a chance to play with it. I liked what they had done with the form factor, but did not enjoy the same tried-and-true UI, which I was sincerely hoping they would have overhauled by that point. Anyway, I posted on my Facebook page that I still preferred the Samsung Galaxy, but it was a nice phone to use, and that, thus, was my opinion and not representing that of the company. I worked the next day, and at the end of my shift, they told me I had breached company policy, despite the policy clearly stating we were allowed to express personal opinions as long as we write that it is not the opinion of Telstra. Needless to say, I blasted them for it and left. The manager contacted me a few weeks later and pleaded not to take legal action against the area manager who had been out to get me since she took over from the last one. She didn't like having somebody around who was more knowledgeable than her. I never bothered. Not worth my time and energy. Story 34. Own a restaurant in a college town. My retired mother placed cleaning service signs around the entrance of my building to earn herself some extra income and give herself something to do. I had an employee decide to prank call the number she left after midnight while we closing and was stupid enough to leave a voicemail asking for favors. His next shift, I played the voicemail for him, and he immediately, but calmly, walked out of the building. Story 35. My mother hired a guy to mow the lawns for her rental properties. One night, the majority of the tools went missing. He showed up for work, acting strange. It was immediately apparent that he had either stolen the tools or knew who had stolen them. When I outright accused him, he made up a story that you are not the only person who got broken into last night. A bunch of people had their tools stolen. I asked how he could possibly know that, and he honestly had not thought that far ahead. He ran away on foot when I started calling the police, but we knew where he lived, so we just waited and filed a report. The police did not follow up or do anything about it. When I called them to follow up, they said it would be considered a civil matter, since they employed him, even though he straight up burglarized their garage. This is the same that said it was a civil matter that someone was stealing appliances out of our building. Story 36. Busted looking at adult film after working for 2 hours. I worked in a warehouse on third shift that regularly had temp workers. One guy that started that night was given an easy job of scanning rejected packages. 2 hours into the shift, his very first shift, the supervisor grabbed him and brought him into the front office and fired him. Later, we learned he was busted by the corporate office looking at adult film on the computer. Story 37. I fired a Japanese girl mainly for selling 18-plus pictures online. In Japan, you can fire people for degrading the image of your company in their private time, but she was doing this in work time. However, after doing the good boss thing and letting her switch a day off for a few hours on a Saturday, she proceeded to play Farmville. I had 2 offices, and she was at the other one while I ran the system at our main office. She typed the report she was supposed to do in her last 5 minutes. She also sent every single password to her Yahoo email, which I deleted as she left it open on her work machine, which is where I also saw the pick emails. 3 nice and big valid reasons to get rid of that one. Story 38. My first day as an assistant store manager for a major retailer, I had come in and had to receive a written note from an associate as to why they need to keep their job, basically called a decision-making day. They had been written up 2 times before that. This 3rd time, they get sent home, paid a full day's work, and then have to have a letter the next day as to why they should not be fired. As this was my first day, I sat him down and talked to him and explained how I am new and will be treating everyone equally regardless of prior write-ups. He says thank you and proceeds to go back to work. I walked to the back room by the break room and seeing him sitting down eating chicken McNuggets laughing. He had just punched in, was on the clock, and left his area unattended. I looked at him and asked him what he was doing. His exact words were, "Ducker got to eat." I fired a kid for eating chicken McNuggets, plus the abusive language, in front of other employees. Story 39. Many years ago, I ran a small construction company. Here are a few that come to mind. 1. Fired a girl for stealing from the client's home. 2. Let 2 guys go because they went to blows on the job in front of the homeowner and her children. 3. Had 1 genius that I caught huffing lacquer thinner. 4. Showed up to 1 job and found 2 guys sleeping on the front lawn. 5. 1 piece of work thought I wouldn't notice. He spent all day hiding and chain smoking in the porta potty. I know there are more. One summer, I went through 13 people in 3 months. Good help is hard to find. For those saying I should have paid more, this was in the mid-90s and I was paying these people $10 an hour, so that was not the problem. Story 40. Oh, camp director here. Had to fire a few employees this summer because they used their work keys to drink on camp property. The irony here is that one of these folks gave a huge speech at the beginning of the season to our younger staff about how, as an athlete, he has learned to make responsible decisions about drinking during the week, etc. Yeah, not so much. Story 41. Not as a boss, but I was fired from a delivery driver job because my truck was towed. My change bag, $27, was in the car and they gave me 3 hours with no car to get it back before they filed theft charges. This was at 9 p.m. I even offered to give them the 20 sought out of my wallet, and I hadn't even missed a delivery. I borrowed a car from one of the cooks. Story 42. So I used to work as a lifeguard manager at a pool in a marginal area of the city. No one ever came to this pool. Ever. Not even once. Which was fine, I guess. Anyway, I was off for the night, and this new kid who just started was there. And I get a call from the police saying that the alarm in the pool building had gone off and that they were at the pool. So I head over there with the police. We wander around and everything is fine. I go to take a leak before I leave and I open the door to the bathroom and 1, it reeks of smoke. 2, my lifeguard employee is there. I figured he had just taken off early. It was raining. Long story short, this DMB git decided to get high on the job, goes into the bathroom to do it, opens the window, sets off the alarm, hides in the toilet, and then tells me the whole story. Story 43. Didn't get fired, but was asked to close down for the night. At the local baseball park, Oklahoma City Redhawks, they have volunteer organizations volunteer to work the Dippin' Dots stands. I was working with my girlfriend this night. It was the first inning, we had no customers, and I was turned around watching the game. It's impossible to steal Dippin' Dots, and I was leaning on the closed cash drawer. My boss came over and told us to stop watching the game. You aren't here to watch the game, You're here to sell Dippin' Dots. Okay, whatever. He then spends the rest of the inning watching us. In the third inning, a Red Hawk player hits a home run, and the crowd starts cheering. I literally turn around, still no line at this point, to see what they were cheering about, then turn back around. My boss, apparently still watching us, comes over and shuts us down. I gotta go on a date with my wife. It turned out to be a wonderful evening. Story 44. I had to fire someone for not doing any work. He'd just come in and mess around on the internet for 8 hours a day. What was ridiculous is how hard it was to fire him. I had to tell him we knew he wasn't working, then give him a chance to fix it, track his non-output for a month, and then fire him. He was actually surprised, even though each week I met with him and said, "If you don't do your work, I will fire you." Story 45. Not me firing this twerp, but still a good story nonetheless. I gave a high school friend of mine a copy of The Terrorist's Handbook. Hey, I was young, naive, and didn't take crap seriously at all. It was just something I had downloaded from some BBS's, yes, I'm that old, back in the day. Anyhow, this chump decides there is crap in there he wants to make and put together. I forget what exactly it was now, but he needed some chemicals. So Mr. Brain Neurosurgeon here gets caught on camera kicking in the door to the high school and stealing stuff from the chem lab. A few days later, he's working the till at McDonald's. When the cops come in, he tries to run, gets tackled in the store, bent over the customer service counter, handcuffed, and dragged out. The manager kindly told him he was fired as he was escorted out. Guess McDonald's doesn't like employees getting arrested in front of customers. Story 46. Stage manager here. I managed a bunch of high school kids, so I had a no-phone policy for my technicians during dress rehearsals and performances. I went around with a bag and collected everyone's phones, then locked the bag in an upstairs office. One night, I have an actor come up to me frantically asking if I'd seen his phone. I told him I hadn't, but I would keep a lookout. About 3 hours later, I see one of my technicians on his cell phone. This doesn't make any sense to me. I had collected his phone earlier, and there's no way he broke into the office. I asked him what was going on, and he tells me very casually that he stole that actor's phone and gave that up to me so he could use his cell. I asked him if he had any important reason to have his cell on him, and he shrugged. He was fired on the spot. Story 47. I noticed this guy was working long, late hours, but barely getting anything done. I checked his computer, and lo and behold, in a folder he thought he could hide from us was Minecraft. He had been playing Minecraft all this time. So I opened Minecraft and accessed his single-player world. I grabbed a flint and steel and burned his in-game house down. I left only a sign, protected from the flames, that read, "You're fired." For clarity, I didn't commit arson, only griefing. Story 48. Fired all the people I was cool with and my good friend/dealer, all in the same day over property we don't even own. We got an employee complaint on the day my DM was in the store. The complaint was that one of the warehouse guys tipped the soda machine and gave out sodas to everyone. My DM got the complaint from HR and had me look into it, and sure enough, I have him on video reaching into the machine, pulling out sodas and handing them out to those who were looking on. DM pulled him into the office and charged him for destruction of company property and theft and fired him. Then he had us pull everyone who received a soda and fired them for receiving stolen property. We fired the only people in the store who knew what they were doing for $1.50 each. Later found out the soda machines don't even belong to the store. Story 49. I had to fire a guy once because he just couldn't learn how to say the names of our products correctly. It was so sad but funny. We sold teas and he pronounced most of them incorrectly, even after being repeatedly corrected. He'd do it with difficult names, like he'd pronounce Ruibos as Rubios, which is understandable since that's a fairly foreign word. But he'd also pronounce common words wrong, like Jasmine, which he pronounced Jasmine. My whole staff was so intelligent and incredibly learned about all of our teas and their ingredients, and it became obvious pretty quickly that he'd never be able to match up. I felt pretty crafty though, because he really loved the store and was so sweet even though he was maybe a bit slow. Story 50. I had a guy that worked for me that was very good at what he did. However, he had the most annoying personality, toxic, loud, was an expert in every subject, etc. He would call me 20 times a day with really stupid ideas on how I could run my business better. But he made me a lot of money, so I put up with it. This guy was also a drunk. He would get off work at 5, and by 6 p.m. when he called with his stupid ideas, he would already be slurring his words. One morning, I awake to a few voicemails from him. Of course he is smashed, drunk, calling me at 2 a.m. and ripping me a new ass for not communicating with him enough. I got pissed, called him right away, 6 a.m., and he had no knowledge of leaving me the message. So yes, I fired someone for reprimanding me. Story 51. This probably isn't ridiculous, but fire a bar manager because he, A, purchased massively capital-intensive kitchen appliances that did not fit and then never sent them back to reclaim the cost. A massive loss. B, could not order the correct food ever, so we'd have like endless supplies of buns but no ketchup for weeks. C, stole booze. D, stole money out of the cash register. Basically, I put it in order because I used progressive discipline, we were unionized, to finally boot somebody who was such a cancer for the staff who worked there. This is not to even touch his many very serious transgressions before I got there, including getting the bar shut down several times for all sorts of reasons, including letting people in after hours to drink as much booze for free as his friends wanted. Story 52. Fired a guy who wouldn't show up for work on time, but always left at the same time as people who did. The day before he was fired, we had a meeting in which he was told that if he was late again, he would be fired. He was 45 minutes late the next day. The weird thing was that he only lived 5 minutes walking distance from the office. Story 53. I once fired a guy at a gas station for sleeping through his shift. He worked third shift, and I knew he had another job. But that's just not something a person can do. The worst part was that I liked him, and it was his second offense. The first time I called him into the office, reviewed the security tape with him in fast-forward mode, which revealed several hours of sleep. I told him that I liked him, that I knew his other job was demanding, but that writing him up was the only way I could not fire him and still keep my job. He promised it wouldn't happen again, but I had to fire him for the same thing a few nights later. At least he was cool about it and didn't have any hard feeling. Story 54. Working for a company with a fleet of drivers, we had to fire a driver because he insisted on using the company phone to arrange substances deals while out on delivery runs. Story 55. Once upon a time, I was a team manager, trainer at a tech support company. Fired a guy on the spot for making blatant, dirty advances at me, telling me what he would like to do to me. He got frustrated and started getting louder and more aggressive about his intentions after I made him hand over his badge and was shouting, "Be the time I got him to the exit door." I tried to quell him by telling him I wasn't gay and he had the wrong guy, but he kept at it until I was forced to take action. Story 56. My boss hired a guy contingent on background and credit check, which is really stupid to begin with. 3 days later, the word comes down that he failed the credit check, and the boss made me fire him since he was in my department. So I told the guy his check came back, and there was a problem. He started spilling about how his fraud and forgery convictions were supposed to be sealed, etc. I said I didn't know anything about that, but it was for the credit check. 3 months later, the company drops the credit check part and the guy gets rehired. Within a week or two, they caught him stealing merchandise. This time he was fired and arrested. Story 57. I used to work in fast food, and a former coworker of mine kept not showing up for his scheduled shifts. The manager called him and he said he was really sick, like in the hospital. But then the manager went to a car shop one day that he was supposed to be working and saw him working there, and so she asked what he was doing and he said, "Oh, I'm just getting my car fixed." But then employees and customers were asking for help, trying to make him get back to doing his job. He's sort of an idiot. The company doesn't care if you have 2 jobs, just as long as you tell them about it and change your availability based on when you can work because of the other one. Story 58. Fired a kid for getting arrested on his smoke break for having a loaded handgun in his glove box. Best that I could figure out was he was smoking near his car. Police stopped to talk to him, and he agreed to let them search his car. No idea why he said yes or why they asked. Fired another kid for being present at a robbery and bragging about it. Only a matter of time before he steals from us. Mind you, these kids are 18 and 20 years old and worked at a very well-paying cell phone store. Story 59. When I worked at a telecommunications company, we fired a rep for transmitting inappropriate material while on the clock. He was clocked in and taking customer service calls, but was sending video messages of another rep giving him a BJ in the back stairwell of the building we worked in. Someone got the video and turned it into HR. They were able to pull the data on the time the video was sent. Turns out, they don't approve of you sending adult videos while you're supposed to be working. No, he didn't get fired for the sex in the building. They were both on break. Story 60. When I was 25, I had to fire my assistant because she treated me like a child in front of the staff and customers. It's hard enough to be taken seriously at that age without your assistant saying, "When I get a minute, doll face," when you tell her to do something. I tried to explain that just because she was old enough to be my mother didn't mean she didn't have to respect me, but she didn't get it. Story 61. My old manager told me a story of a time he worked at a pizza joint. He was the opening manager, but there was a prep worker who came in an hour earlier. One day my manager had to come in early. He walked in and didn't see the prepper, so wondering why he wasn't working, decided to go into the walk-in cooler. When he walked in, he seen the prepper pants down, balls deep in pizza dough. Needless to say, he was fired on the spot and told to take the dough home with him. Story 62. I was managing an ISP help desk, and we hired a guy on the night shift by himself to answer the very few calls that came in and write documentation. Instead, he watched adult films. Not just that, but he printed dirty pictures on the main copier and then left it there. He got a warning twice, but kept at it until he was gone. 6 months later, I get a call from a prospective employer. The ex-employee had put me down as a reference. Without giving any details, I just said I could not justifiably give him a good reference. Story 63, call center job. I let a guy go because he thought it would be a good idea to resign via mass email to BCC'd audience. He ranted about how his superior intelligence was not worthy of working here, etc. The clincher, he made his resignation effective like 4 months out, just after annual bonuses were paid. I replied to all, stating I accepted his resignation, effective immediately, and proceeded to walk him out of the building. He was pissed, cussing me out the whole way, but I had a slight smile on my face as I waved him goodbye. Story 64. I was the assistant manager at the time, so I didn't do the actual firing, but we fired someone for stealing another employee's marijuana. The hilarious thing about it was that the victim came to me and said that someone has been taking my weed. I lost $100 of it on Thursday and another $100 worth on Friday and another $100 today. I asked him why he didn't keep it in his car, and he told me that his car was in the shop, so he brought it into the store. The joys of fast food. Story 65. We had an employee who would take 2-hour lunches with other employees, disappear for days, and shoot golf balls in the parking lot. He got fired because his sales scores were the lowest. Such is life at a dealership. Story 66. I had a service crew that was actually dealing substances out of my office. Sure, firing them was not ridiculous. Having to go through the unemployment comp process and having to tell the magistrate that yes, it is indeed our policy to terminate employees who are breaking federal substances laws. There was another guy I fired for admitting to me he was an addict. He drove a huge bucket truck, stoned all of the time. He was shocked when I told him he was fired. Story 67. I had to fire 2 people at once for giving false references on their resume. The ridiculous thing was I was their previous manager, and we were all moving to the same company where I was to be their manager again. So there was no reason for them to lie except their own stupidity. I still have no idea why they thought it would be a good idea and why they thought I wouldn't give them a good reference. Just made no sense. Story 68. Friend of a friend was fired for putting his balls through the bottom of a takeout soup cup and making it look like it was resting on his lap while sitting in their work truck. Got the attention of the other passenger, who was his manager, to look in the soup bowl. Manager told boss, guy got fired. Strangest story I'd heard in a while. The guy was in a really good job for over a year and has a wife and kid. Seems so random to do. Story 69. At the Pilot, truck stop I used to work at, we had one of the maintenance guys fired for spying on truckers while they were in the shower. His main job was to clean the showers and take out the trash. One of the managers walked back to tell him something and saw that he was spying through one of the vents on the door. I guess he tried to tell the manager that he was cleaning the vents with no rag in his hand. Bosses of Reddit, what is something hilariously dumb you have caught one of your employees doing? Story 1. The weirdest thing is happening here. I've been watching that clock for the last hour and it hasn't moved. I explained to the employee that the battery had died. He was not in a time warp. Story 2. We have an employee that types Google on the Bing search bar of his browser, then hits the first result, google.com, and proceeds to Google Gmail every time he wants to check his email. Story 3. Slipping a $20 bill from the register into her bra, and then vehemently denying it, calling me an idiot after I confronted her. I was 3 feet away from her and looking at her when she did it, and she was on camera. Story 4. I used to work for an IT company that relied on a lot of intern labor. I was a former intern who got promoted and trained and supervised interns in my department. To explain this, I'll have to tell a little about our office. We had this weird setup where we were in some spare land next to a city maintenance yard, overlooking a great view. Despite the view, the land was pretty much undevelopable, and in Southern California, that's saying a lot, because the city got there first. Whatever, I could look out the window and see a great view, stretching on forever. But we had city maintenance trucks in and out, and while I didn't work for the city, we did some work for them, so we knew each other. And most of all, we knew not to block the driveway at all, ever. We were allowed to park in our gravel parking lot, which had the great view, but blocking the tarmac was a very big no-no. Occasionally, tourists would get lost looking for a scenic spot and block the path, but we'd let them park in our lot, take their pictures, and leave. So we got these 3 college student interns doing video production and animation. Thankfully, not my department, but I wasn't too grateful because I had my own crop of high schoolers to run herd on in my department. One day, 2 of the college interns don't come in, call, and say they're sick. That afternoon, I hear a few cars coming down the driveway and park outside. I'm working on a project that's close to deadline, so I don't even think about it past damn tourists. About half an hour later, there's honking outside. I drew the short straw to look outside and see what the commotion is, and there's 3 convertibles full of college students drinking and listening to music and taking pictures in our driveway, with a city pickup truck right behind them, honking at them to get out of the way. The students, for their part, were mostly flipping the city workers off. I run to the city truck first, make profuse apologies, and tell them the students aren't with us, and that it'll be handled. At about this point, I noticed that 2 of the college kids are Aura of the animation intern. Guess they found a nice place to have a party. and told their friends. I run inside our office and say to the animation VP supervisor, "Joe, found your interns." Joe, knowing exactly how deep the crap is, runs out. I just sit down at my computer and try to work while the volume of yelling outside doubles. After about 2 minutes, the cars turn around in our lot and drive off, and the VP supervisor comes back inside. I'm not sure what he said to them, but neither ever came back, and we never ever had any other interns from that college. In retrospect, and looking at the stories in this thread, I'm glad my own interns didn't get any worse than looking at a cell phone during a meeting with customers. Story 5. We hired a receptionist who, 2 weeks after starting work, decided to print off about 150 color Christmas cards using company paper and ink and the expensive new printer. She honestly didn't seem to think she was doing anything wrong and threatened to sue when she was fired because it's illegal to fire people at Christmas time. She was laughed at and never heard from again. Story 6. Not me, but my coworker who is the operations manager walked into work one morning to find a guy passed out drunk with an empty 30-pack and half-full bottle of Jack next to him, all lights on, and dangerous equipment running. He was supposed to stay an hour late the previous day, finish a project, and had decided to leave the building unsecured. He didn't have a key or passcode to go get liquor and beer, come back and drink till he passed out. Surely all of that took longer than the hour it would have taken for him to finish the job and go home. Bonus, he was fired on the spot and then tried to sue the company. Story 7. I had an intern skip a day of work without calling in. I gave him a call and he told me he had a stomach flu. I explained that he's welcome to take time off for sickness, but he has to call in or email and let me know. The next day, he skipped again and didn't call, so I repeated the process. He did this a third time. When he came back to work, I asked to see him in my office. I let him tell me all about his stomach flu. Then I opened a folder on my desk with Facebook images where his friends had come into town to visit and tagged him in photos of them doing shots in bars for the past 3 days. I said, "Is stomach flu a type of shot?" The funny part is that if you had just told me your buddies were coming to town and you wanted to go on a 3-day bender, I would have given you the time off. The next time you decide to lie to an employer, set your Facebook to private. You're fired, and you're not getting any college credit for this. I don't want to ruin your relationship with the college, so I'm going to give you an option. You can go back and just tell them that this opportunity didn't work out. Or if you want to fight about the months you've just squandered here for no college credit whatsoever, I'll forward these photos to your advisor. It's your call. He thanked me for the life lesson, packed up his crap, and left. Story 8. I take general escalated calls for an insurance company. There are 4 or 5 different specialty numbers that certain calls have to go to because I'm either not trained to handle them or I just have the wrong kind of insurance license. I can insure anything that's not alive, so no life or health insurance, and I couldn't take the call if I wanted to. So this woman gets hired, and immediately I'm having 5 or 6 conversations a day with her where I'm saying, "Do you have the information to be able to transfer to X department?" Okay, good. So since you know that this is an X call, it needs to go there. You need to hang up with me and call them because I can't help this person. She'd argue with me and insist that I had to take the call. And a couple times, she'd even transfer after I'd told her no, so that I had to immediately turn around and tell this person, "Hi, I can't help you. I'm going to transfer you again to someone who can." Then she started complaining to her supervisor about me. So he'd come over and talk to my supervisor, who would tell him, "Of course, Flying Guinea Pig can't take X calls. That's why we have a whole different number specifically for X calls." So this went on for a few months. I was starting to dread seeing her name pop up on my screen. I'd ask her if she remembered when she'd tried to transfer an X call yesterday, and I'd told her no, and what she thought she should do with the X call that she had today. The answer was always, "Transfer it to you." It started to frighten me after a while, that she not only refused to listen to me, or either one of our supervisors, but that she got angrier with every attempt. She started saying, "I am going to transfer this call, and you are going to help them." And when that didn't work, just flat out lying to me about what the call was about. One day, after we'd gone through this little song and dance, she revealed that her supervisor was listening in and had heard me tell her that I won't take the call, which means that he heard her attempting to transfer it to the wrong place and getting angry when I told her no. So her great trump card, of which she was very proud, was that she'd just been caught using improper transfer procedure. Somehow that was supposed to make me take the call. They fired her at the end of the week. Story 9. I worked for a corporate office building security while in college. We got a new guy who accidentally took home a set of keys. We figured it out when we checked the inventory and saw he was the last one to have them. This is a common mistake even I'd made. The next day, me and one of my fellow supervisors called him into the office to ask him for the keys. We were just trying to keep him from getting into trouble, so it was an act that could get you fired, so we were doing it quietly. He insisted he didn't have the keys. I asked him to check his pockets of his jacket. He did, and his face went into shock. He pulled out the keys in utter amazement. I asked him, "If you turned them in, How did they end up in your jacket pocket? He thought for a second, looked me in the eye and said, "Someone here must not like me. Someone stole the keys and snuck into my house to put them in my jacket pocket while I was asleep." I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. We let him go. Story 10. I work with a woman who will use a calculator to come up with the figures she needs. She will then take all those numbers and manually input them into an Excel document rather than just doing everything in Excel.